your return on ingestion get hold of?
You will start with the cruciferous vegetables, exactly what you said, and understand what they are in your part of the world and your culture, because where you are in Hong Kong, we share, cruciferous vegetables are ubiquitous, but you're going to have some beautiful specialty crucifers and cabbages that we don't have in North America. And it's the same in Australia and New Zealand. I noticed that too. You're going to have some different different varietals within cruciferous family. And that's really, really important to understand. Yeah, so don't leave the grocery store, the supermarket, without something that is a crucifer, even if it's a radish, because the impact of that food on your genes is crucial. Those are the diamonds for the human body. So that's number one. Number two, I would definitely say your legumes or pulses. You may call them pulses. And the reason I say that is you start to see patterns when you read DNA. And one of the things that's had so much press is the methylation process. I don't know if anybody's talked about that on your podcast, but this is probably the biochemical pathway that most practitioners never learned about. It's not a pathway, it's a series. It's a process of producing a molecule that impacts so many enzymes in the body. But that's for another 1 hour podcast, how that works. But instrumental to the way that pathway works is folate. So to me, like the starting molecule is folate. And it's completely, and yes, you find folate in cruciferous vegetables, but the most overlooked group of foods that contains folate are your pulses or legumes. So things like chickpeas or cannellini, they have different names around the world. Lentils, these are very, very powerful, rich foods. Yeah, they're protein rich, right? Very important. They're fiber rich. They're very B vitamin rich, but they are super rich in folate. So let's talk about why folate is important. It starts this process of helping produce an active molecule that your body needs. I mean, you can't produce creatine in the body, and you can't synthesize creatine, which is instrumental, right, to energy and muscle. It's the most abundant amino acid in the body. You can get it from the diet when your body produces it. You can't do that. You can't produce CoQ10. Really important, right, for the mitochondria and energy, actually mitochondrial protection and membrane protection. Can't do that without methyl group. You can't break down dopamine without a methyl group, and it goes on and on and on. And what you can and can't synthesize without it. But the reason I'm so adamant about this group of foods, let's talk about some other foods, things like oranges, mangoes, broccoli, asparagus, also wonderful sources of folate. Mangoes, oranges, I mentioned. So those are off the top of my head. And tomatoes as well, sun-dried tomatoes, wonderful sources. So what is happening in our world is that we started to grow wheat and fortified wheat. When we started to grind wheat, right, and put it into anything that's handheld, this is very specifically, we think of Australia and we think of North America and parts of Europe. A lot of handheld foods start with like a pizza crust or a bread or a flat bread, right? Unless they're made at home. So as we started to strip wheat and mill wheat, and we started to notice like aberrations, like what is it with fertility? It's gone right out of my head. When we had children born, not with spina bifida, it was it's gone right out of my head. But anyway, so neurological complications. One of you say, it's this, Amanda. So anyway, but neurological complications, fertility issues, we can start to connect that because these wheat-based products are fortified with folic acid, which is a synthetic form. When we're able to look at how the body handles that, the body can transform folic acid into a form that the body can use. But when it does that, it gums up the works of how we take folate and put it in this active form that the body can use. So it's really interesting because there's neurological implications. So it slows down folic acid and all these wheat products. They're good for you, right? Whole grains or what have you. But suddenly we're eating all these handheld foods synthetically, it's fortified with synthetic folic acid. And that has to be biotransformed to the active form. So if that's where you're getting your folate from, depending on your genes, it can be a really slow, cumbersome process, and you may not produce as much of this active form of folate. Whereas you eat your legumes and those foods that I mentioned, it's in the form the body can use immediately. So it doesn't matter what's going on with your genes, you get to where you need to a lot faster. And the other thing that we saw, and just why I talk so much about know your foods that are rich in folate, is when you jam up this cycle with the synthetic form of folate, folic acid, and sometimes we use the terms interchangeably, so you have to be careful that sometimes people say folic acid and they mean the active form of folate. But when it gets jammed in this cycle, getting ready to prepare it so the body can use it, one of the genes that it ties up actually helps the body recycle a nutrient that's instrumental to how your body produces dopamine and serotonin. So dopamine is our not feel good. It's a pat on the back. It's like the risk reward, like, hey, you did good. You can calm down there. You've got your euphoria. You're good. Pat on the back, like your dog wags his tail. Good dog. And serotonin, right? It's like, you're good. And serotonin, of course, is, I feel good about ourselves. I feel good. All's okay. Good mood hormone. Imagine if the body is missing a key molecule consistently to help produce these molecules, which are instrumental to our neurological or cognitive health. Can you start to see the connections with fortified food and why we're having potentially some of these fertility issues? We didn't talk about that a lot. That's a lot more complicated, probably with another expert. But where I see it is neurologically, that there's no coincidence potentially that we're seeing these significant changes in children's health, particularly ADHD. Where did this come from? Well, when you look at it through the lens of genes, we can see the aberrations regardless of what I just talked about. So they may need help anyway, but when you jam them up and they're eating junk food or food that's fortified with a synthetic folic acid, that's one of the first things we do is like, let's get rid of this. And of course, the one thing these kids crave are the carbs that contain the very nutrient that is probably impacting them neurologically. There's a lot of other reasons, but so you said a group of foods, cruciferous vegetables, foods that have the natural form of folate are an absolute must, because their impact, talk about ROI, is huge.